Clos de Monsieur MacDonald. This message is thought by everyone to be a rank fraud. It is supposed to come not from Prince Ching, but from the leader of the Kansu troops, and is probably intended to lure some of the foreigners outside the legation and then to shoot them. Same date, 3 p.m. 20 Russians and 4 Americans made an attack on a house to the west of the Russian legation, where there were about 60 Chinese snipers. On arriving at the wall, they found there was no way to get into the yard. So each man took a brick, and, at a given signal, heaved them all together into the yard, shouting and reviling the Chinamen. Alarmed by this, they fled, and the men took the building without a shot being fired on either side. At this time, the Chinese at other points started up a brisk fire, lasting about 10 minutes. July 16th, 7 a.m. While on a tour of inspection in the Su Wang Fu, in company with Dr. Morrison and Colonel Shiba, Captain B. M. Strauss R. M. L. I. was shot and mortally wounded by a sniper. Dr. Morrison was shot in the leg, though not seriously. Captain Strauss died at 11 a.m. and was buried at 6 p.m. yesterday. One of the United States Marines, Private Fisher, was killed the same day. It is indeed a pitiable plight that we are in now. Neither the Americans nor the British have any leader. Captain Myers is disabled by the spear wound he received in the sortie of July 3rd. Captain Strauss is dead. Captain Halliday, the only other able British captain, is crippled by a wound received 3 weeks ago. Sir Claude MacDonald, though he assumes charge, is no man for the situation, and the French and Germans deny his authority. General Sun Ching, Commander-in-Chief, who fought the Battle of Tientsin against the Allied international armies. Same date, 5 p.m. The messenger sent yesterday returned with 4 others, who waited for him at the bridge. He brought a letter from Yung Lu to Sir Claude MacDonald, and a telegram from Washington to Mr. Conger. The letter to Sir Claude contained nothing of any importance. The telegram Mr. Conger recognized as being in the State Department cipher, but could not determine its meaning, as it had evidently been tampered with in some way by the Chinese. So the messenger was sent back with a request that the full original telegram be sent. July 17th. The messenger returned again, bringing a telegram from Wu Ting-fang, the Chinese minister at Washington, enclosing one from the Secretary of State. This read, "Communicate tidings to bearer." To this the minister sent in reply, "1 month in the British legation under shot and shell. Will all be massacred unless help comes soon." One of Yung Lu's soldiers came in the morning and gave himself up at the German legation, and asked for some medicine for a wound in the ear. He said that Yung Lu had ordered the soldiers to stop firing, but to hold their positions, and that he was very desirous that the foreigners should be protected. Not a shot has been fired since early morning. This is probably due to a fear that the foreign troops are near, and the government wishes to protect itself by saying they were unable to control the Boxers and the Kansu soldiers. Several other Chinese soldiers gave themselves up as prisoners at the different legations, though with what purpose no one can say. General Mayu-kun, Major General under Sun Ching, also engaged in the Battle of Tientsin with the Allied international armies. July 18th. As Yung Lu had expressed a willingness to assist the foreigners, a messenger was sent to him requesting that supplies of fresh vegetables, eggs, meat, etc., might be sent to the legation for the women and children. This was promised, and watermelons and peaches have already been sent to the Japanese in the Su Wang Fu and to the Americans on the wall. The soldiers on the wall go on each other's barriers and chat in the most friendly manner. There are great numbers of Boxers in the city, especially in the South City, but the troops are no longer in league with these. A messenger sent out by the Japanese minister on the 30th ultimate returned today from Tientsin, bringing word that a mixed force of 33,300 would start from there for the relief of Peking about the 20th NST. The force is to consist of 24,000 Japanese, 4,000 Russian, 2,000 British, 1,500 American, 1,500 French, and 300 German troops. He reports that he left by the Seichuamen East Gate on June 30th, proceeding to Tientsin by boat. He arrived at Tientsin on July 5th, but was unable to enter the city, as it was surrounded by Chinese troops. He walked round the city gates and found a force of Chinese, under General Chang, posted north of the railway station, cannonading a force of Japanese holding the ground south of the station. On July 9th, General Chang was defeated, and he, the messenger, managed to get through the Japanese lines on July 12th and delivered the Japanese minister's letter to the Japanese consul. While in Tientsin, he gleaned the following news: that General Ni was dead, that all the missionaries in Tientsin and outlying stations had left for home, and that the Taku forts were taken without difficulty by the foreigners on June 17th. On July 14th, the foreign troops took the native city of Tientsin after a 2-day attack. On July 15th, the messenger left Tientsin for Peking, being escorted by the Japanese to the second bridge. He returned to Peking by road. Gordon Hall, in the cellar of this building, all the women and children remained during the shelling of Tientsin by the Chinese troops. It is one of the most beautiful and attractive buildings in Tientsin, and in strange contrast with its Chinese surroundings. Among other things he mentioned was that the Tunchu Taotai had been lodged in the Board of Punishments, and that prior to his own arrival in Tientsin, no news of Peking had reached that place since about the end of June. We look for the troops about the 30th INST, if they have no fighting to do on the way. This explains why the government is so anxious to have peace in the capital at present. They are awaiting the issue of a contest between the relief force and the Chinese troops between here and Tientsin. If our troops are victorious, as of course they will be, unless outnumbered overwhelmingly, the government will say they have done all in their power to stop the fighting, but have not been able to control their troops until now. If our troops are defeated, they will turn on us and slaughter us. In the meantime, we have a resting spell of a few days. Bulletin. Précis of further correspondence between the British minister and Prince Qing and others. Street vendors of Tientsin, a vast amount of business is transacted by these merchants, whose stock in trade is of the smallest, and whose transactions are so insignificant as to be incredible according to Western ideas. On July 16th, the Chinese sent a reply to Sir Claude's letter of the 15th, in which they explained that the reason for suggesting the removal of the legation staffs to the Tsunliamen was that the Chinese government could afford more efficient protection to them if concentrated there than if scattered, as at present. As the foreign ministers, however, do not agree, the Chinese will, as in duty bound, do their utmost to protect the legations where they are. They will bring reinforcements and continue their efforts to prevent the Boxers from firing, and they trust the foreign ministers on their part will restrain their troops also from firing. July 17th, a.m. Sir Claude replied to the effect that the foreign troops had all along acted entirely in self-defense and would continue to do so. But the Chinese must understand that previous events had led to a want of confidence, and that if barricades were erected or troops moved in the vicinity of the legations, the foreign guards would be obliged to fire on them. July 17th p.m. The Chinese replied, reviewing the situation and ascribing the present hostilities to the attacks previously made by the legation guards. They noted with satisfaction that a cessation of firing is agreed to on both sides, but suggest that as foreign soldiers here have been firing from the city wall east of the Tianmen, they should be removed from that position. Seen at a street corner in Tientsin, July 18th, noon, Sir Claude replied with a review of the situation from the foreign point of view. On June 19th, the Yamen had given the legations notice to quit Peking, and the foreign representatives had replied, pointing out that there were no facilities of transportation. The Yamen had then replied, extending the time. But, in spite of this, fire was opened on the legations on the following day, and they had been under constant fire from Chinese government troops ever since, a condition of things unparalleled in the world's history. He alluded to the incident of the board displayed on June 25th, the free moving of troops during the cessation of hostilities thus caused, and the renewed attacks made after the completion of the preparations thus facilitated. He hoped that mutual confidence would gradually be restored, but meanwhile he again pointed out that cessation of hostile preparations, as well as of actual firing, was necessary on the part of the Chinese forces to secure that the foreign troops should cease shooting. As for the suggestion that the foreign troops should leave the city wall, it was impossible to accede to it, because a great part of the attacks on the legation had been made from the wall. He concluded by suggesting that sellers of fruit or ice should be allowed to come in. In a letter addressed the same day to Yomlu, the substance of Sir Claude's previous letters was repeated, and a suggestion was made that communications would be facilitated if a responsible official were sent to the legation. In response to this suggestion, A Yamen secretary arrived this afternoon with a card from Yonglu. He had no special message but promised to see whether Peking gazettes could be procured and a market established for ice, fruit, eggs, etc., and also to ascertain whether telegrams could be transmitted on behalf of the foreign ministers to their governments. He mentioned that telegraphic communication was interrupted. He expressed the concern of the Chinese government at the deeds of the Boxers, who had caused the whole difficulty between China and the foreign powers. July 19th. A very quiet day, no firing on either side. About 250 eggs and a few vegetables were brought in by Chinese soldiers for sale. The Yamen sent another message asking that the ministers leave here for Tientsin. July 20th. Several copies of the Peking Gazette of the past month were procured from the Chinese. Translations of a number of edicts contained therein are given in another chapter. The ministers replied to the Yamen's request of yesterday, saying that, as the Boxers were so numerous outside the city, they would not dare to trust themselves on the road. For cartloads of watermelons and vegetables were sent to the ministers by the Yamen as a sign of good feeling. No firing all day except for a few shots fired by Boxers in the South City against our men on the wall. July 24th. Mr. Narahara, second secretary of the Japanese legation, died in the early morning of lockjaw from a wound. Same date, 7 p.m. The following was received from Colonel Shiba. A Chinaman who came to our barricade this afternoon says that on the 17th of this month Yangtze was occupied by the foreign troops, and on the 19th a battle took place around the same place. About 150 wounded of Tung Fu Xiang's troops have just been brought to Peking. The foreign troops were about 40 li this side of Yangtze when the wounded men started. July 26th. Colonel Shiba reports. A Chinaman states that about 11 o'clock on the 24th instant the Chinese troops under General Chang were attacked by foreign troops 30 li south of Hashuwu, halfway between Tientsin and here by road, and driven back at midnight to the latter place. At 10 a.m. yesterday Hashuwu was attacked, and the Chinese troops driven back with heavy loss to 10 li north of the latter place. The force of 4,800 men, who came from the west with 9 guns, left Peking at 6 o'clock yesterday morning for Hashuwu. Since the beginning of the truce on July 18th, the soldiers of Yonglu have observed the truce and refrained from firing. But those fronting us on the north wall and on the west of the legation have started sniping again. The latter are Tung Fu Xiang's troops. July 25th. Qin Sushi, a messenger who left our lines 8 days ago carrying an official letter to Yonglu, returned today. He says that he delivered the letter at Yonglu's headquarters and was locked up there 7 days. Yonglu goes to court every day. The emperor and empress dowager are still in the city. Boxers patrol the streets in small bands. For days ago a ragged, dirty foreigner, hatless and coatless, of general disreputable appearance, was captured by Tung Fu Xiang's men and brought to Yonglu. He was of medium height, blonde mustache and beard, and spoke Chinese. This referred to a Swede named Nestergaard, who, on some slight offense, left the legation and went over to the Chinese. He said he went out to find food. Meanwhile Boxers assembled around Yonglu's house and demanded the foreigner, but Yonglu sent him off under guard to the Yamen of the Shuntianfu for safekeeping. A messenger sent out on July 4th to go to Tientsin with our letter returned today, bringing the following note from the British consul at Tientsin. Your letter of July 4th received. There are now 24,000 troops landed and 10,000 here. General Gasly expected at Taku tomorrow. Russian troops are at Peking. Tientsin city is under foreign government, and Boxer power here is exploded. There are plenty of troops on the way if you can keep yourselves in food. Almost all ladies have left Tientsin. Signed, Vu. Carles. Dated July 22nd. The letter of July 4th gave details of the siege up to that date, numbers of killed and wounded, and stated that Chinese troops had fired into the legation quarter continuously since June 20th, and that we were hard-pressed. This answer of the British consul aroused great indignation among all the besieged. It had been impossible up to that time to get any word from the outside world, though many messengers were sent out, and then when one did succeed in getting through the Chinese lines, to receive a letter, and that from an official too, which gave no information of any attempt to relieve us, Following is the story of the runner's trip to Tientsin and back. Lin Wuyuan, 16 years old, a messenger, native of Shantung, living in Peking, arrived this morning from Tientsin. He left Peking with letters on the night of July 4th, disguised as a beggar. He was let down over the wall by a rope, crept along the moat to the Qianmen, slept under the gate, and in the morning walked to the Yangting men, passed through, and went to Machiapa station without being molested. Hearing nothing there, he went to Tungchao and worked his way along the main road to Tientsin. At a village near Hashiwu, he was stopped by the villagers and made to work 8 days. He reached Tientsin July 18th, first met Russian, then Japanese, and on July 21st met the British troops at Peking Men, the entrance through the defense wall half a mile from Tientsin City, on the Peking Road. He delivered his letters to a foreigner in citizen dress, who spoke Chinese. On July 22nd, he was taken to the British consulate. There the consul gave him a letter. He was then sent to the foreign outpost at Hunkian, Red Bridge over the Paodingfu River, a half-mile west of Tientsin City. On July 23rd, he left Hungshio and soon met the Chinese troops. That night he slept at Yangtsun in a locomotive boiler near the bridge. The bridge there was not destroyed. That day he saw only Chinese infantry, the main body of which was at Peking. He saw no boxers. The night of July 24th he slept near Hashiwu. Saw few soldiers and no boxers. The night of July 25th he slept at Madoyu. That day he saw a few parties of boxers in villages, but none on the road. At Madoyu and elsewhere he saw that the river was in high flood. Few boats moving, but many moored to the banks. On July 26th had no adventures. He spent the night at Uchiawai 20 li from Peking. Approach to Hadaman Gate in wall destroyed by the Russians. Elsewhere in this work is presented a view of the top of this wall, indicating its great width. The view above shows its height and form. To the left is the encircling canal, with its stagnant water and accumulations of filth. Under a corner of the wall near the bend of the canal may be seen a caravan. A blockhouse or fortification is shown on top of the wall. At the right, the larger building upon the top of the wall indicates where one of the city gates is placed. The foundation of the wall is of great blocks of hewn stone, above which are tiers of sun-dried brick. On July 27th he reached the Shakwa Gate, the east gate of the South City, at 10 a.m. He found the roads good. Telegraph poles and wire along the river all gone. Railway torn up everywhere, rails buried or used for making boxer swords. He was not stopped at the gate, though there were many boxers and Tung Fu Xiang's men there. He made his way without trouble to the Hatamen, which he found closed, and to the water gate, which was too closely guarded to pass by day. The man slept last night near the Qianmen, crawled along the moat, and entered the water gate without challenge before daylight this morning. He said the high road to Tientsin is in good condition. Crops everywhere look well. Villagers are attending to their farms, but there is a boxer organization in every village. When he left Tientsin, the foreign troops had not advanced beyond the defense wall, Sen Kohin Sin's Fali, built by that general against the British and French in 1860 but never defended, hence the name Fali, surrounding Tientsin City at a distance of 1/2 to 1 mile. All the yamens in Tientsin are occupied by foreign troops, chiefly Japanese. All boxers have left the front at Tientsin because badly punished in the battle, so the Chinese soldiers despise them. Chinese army was concentrating on Peking, 8 miles northwest of Tientsin. The messenger had $1 in his pocket when he met the foreign pickets at Tientsin, and they relieved him of it, lest he might lose it. Colonel Shiba's informant gives the following dates of battles. Battle at Saitsin, July 24th, 1 to 12 p.m. Battle at Hashiwu, July 25th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Battle at Opping, July 26th, 6 to 9 p.m. Chinese troops retired to Madoyu on the 27th INST July 29th. Reports from various sources, etc. Foreign troops advance on the 26th from Opping toward Madoyu, from 3 a.m. to 12 a.m., and were driven back to Opping by the Chinese at daylight on the 27th. Foreign troops of 3 nationalities at Opping. Chinese ammunition short. Southern rice boats in the hand of the foreign army. Russian troops are advancing toward Kalgan. From a man from Champingchu, 18 miles south of the Great Wall. July 29 p.m. reported Yangtze completely destroyed by foreign troops 2 or 3 days ago, and foreign army in steady advance. The Empress Dowager desires Tung Fu Xiang and Yong Lu to send her with an army to Xianfu, the capital of Shanxi. They do not consent and suggest Li Pinghang to help conquer us. He is ordered up, has arrived, and is now attacking the Pudong. During the night, a strong barricade was built on the North Bridge. 200 Boxers took up a position on it and commenced firing. July 30th, 10 a.m. The Chinese army messenger left Changqiawen at 8 o'clock yesterday evening. He reports desultory fighting from 3 a.m. to 8 p.m. yesterday. Many Chinese were killed. The foreign army advanced to Madoyu yesterday at 8 a.m. Chinese retreated on Changqiawen. They have about 10,000 men. 3 cannon have been taken from the Qian men to the front. Fighting at Pudong is continued by Boxers. The firing from the North Bridge is by a company of 200 Boxers having only 13 rifles. The Empress has 300 carts and Tung Fu Xiang 100. Ready to start west. The date is a secret. Tung's fourth son, with 500 men, has reached Liangxiang on the way west. This news was brought in by a soldier of Tung Fu Xiang's bodyguard, who brings us regularly the report of the army messenger. Same date, 7:30 p.m. Yesterday morning Mr. Sugi sent 2 outside coolies to Tungchao to inquire in regard to the foreign army, etc. They returned this evening. They report that men in Tungchao affirm that the foreign army had fought the Chinese yesterday just south of Madoyu. They also report having seen a man from Chaikiachuan, 8 miles east of Tungchao, who says foreign troops have come to relieve the Catholics there, and are distant but a mile or so from the entrenchments, letters having already been exchanged. The Peking gates, except the Chihua men and the Pingsu men, are ready to be closed, with stone and sandbags at their sides. Many Boxers have been killed at the Pudong. 12 regiments of General Ma's troops are to go to Changqiawen. We have given each of these coolies a small letter to the commander of the troops and offered a reward for a return tomorrow night with an answer. The troops must be pretty near us, and we may hope to see them in 2 days. July 31st, 11 a.m. The regular Chinese army courier arrived from the field of battle this morning at 4:30. He reports, in the hearing of one of Tung Fu Xiang's bodyguard, the same man who has brought us the reports of the movements of the foreign army from Yangtze. The foreign army advanced from Madoyu, fighting from 8 p.m. on the 29th, and arrived at Changqiawen at 5 p.m. yesterday. The Chinese army is 5 miles south of Tungchao. August 1st. The following letter received today by Colonel Shiba, dated Tientsin, the 26th ultimate. Your letter of the 22D received. Departure of troops from Tientsin delayed by difficulties of transportation, but advance will be made in 2 or 3 days. Will write again as soon as estimated date of arrival at Peking is fixed. Tea caravan resting outside of city wall. One might imagine this picture to illustrate a scene in Bible times, in Palestine or Egypt, but time does not make any changes in China. Nothing changes there, save through the influence of outside aggression. Here is a caravan from the interior of Asia, halted outside the city wall for entrance in the morning. The burdens have been taken from the camels and the beasts have settled for rest. A somewhat mangled but authentic telegram has been received from London. The telegram is undated, but was sent off probably between the 21st and 24th ultimate. It refers to a letter written by the Japanese minister about June 29th, and to a telegram from the United States minister, dated July 18th, from which it may be inferred that the state of affairs here on the latter date was everywhere known. It also says that the Chinese troops, after severe fighting, were finally routed from Tientsin on the 15th ULT, and that arrangements for our relief were being hastened. It further asks if the Chinese government is protecting us and supplying provisions, etc. Very few provisions have been sent in today. A desultory firing has been kept up all the time from the North Bridge and the Mongol market. The messenger, who has been bringing in the previous rumors of the progress of the troops, said that they had been driven back from Changqiawen to Oping. As the letter from Tientsin has proved him an arrant liar, in future no more attention will be paid to his stories. It is a great disappointment after being told that the relief were within 2 days of us, to hear that they have not yet started and have not yet fixed a date for starting. The messenger's story has been well arranged all along, and has agreed very well with the letter received by the Japanese minister on July 18th. As we have had no later information, the British consul's letter gave none. As to the movements of the army, we have believed just what the Chinaman told us, and as long as he was getting paid for it, he would give us any kind of rumors. August 2nd. Extracts from various letters received from Tientsin. Mr. E.B. Drew to Sir Robert Hart, July 28th. Yours of 21st wired home. Keep heart. Aid coming early. Troops pouring in. Enemy is at Peking. Japs and Russians in his front. Very little rain. Yangtze Valley agitated. Lu and Chang trying to keep order. Li Hung Chang at Shanghai. Doubtful if he is coming to Chile. Tientsin is governed by a joint foreign commission. Manchuria rising against foreigners. Russians hands full there. Nuchwang much disturbed. Germany and America each sending 15,000 men. Italy 5,000. Canton West River. Ichang threatening. Earnestly hope rescue of you all. Mr. E.K. Lowry to Mrs. Lowry, July 30th. Bearer arrived last Friday evening, with news from Peking. The 9th and 14th Regiments, United States, already at Tientsin. 6th Cavalry at Taku on its way up. There was fighting at Peking this morning. Everything quiet here now. Word came today that the Boxers are killing Christians at Sunhua, Shanhaiguan, and many other places. Russians and imperial troops have fought at Chinha. Tientsin is full of foreign soldiers and more are coming all the time. Railroad open between here and Tanku. Many ladies and children were taken to the United States by the transport Logan. All property at Paiteho has been destroyed. Bale tea ready for shipment to Russia. Some idea of the great quantities of tea produced, and of the method of packing, may be gathered from this picture. Consul Ragsdale to Mr. Conger, July 28th. Had lost all hope of ever seeing you again. Prospect now brighter. We had 30 days shelling here, 9 days siege. Thought that bad enough. Scarcely a house escaped damage. Excitement at home intense, of course. Our prayers and hope are for your speedy rescue. Advance of troops tomorrow probable. From J. S. Mallory, Lieutenant Colonel 41st U.S. Infantry. A relief column of 10,000 is on the point of starting for Peking. More to follow. God grant they may be in time. Colonel Warren to Captain Myers. Have been trying to reach you ever since June 21st. Relieved the foreign settlement June 23rd. Seymour, June 24th. Captured East Arsenal June 26th. Captured West Arsenal July 10th. Captured Tientsin City July 14th. Will advance in 2 days. Column 10,000 strong. English, American, and Japanese. 40,000 more following in a few days. Hold on by all means. First column will support you and divert enemy from you. There will be 8 regiments of United States infantry, 3 of cavalry and 2 batteries of artillery, also 500 Marines. Infantry will be in the first column. Enemy strongly entrenched 17 miles north of here, Yangtze, and at 2 points farther on. The customs volunteers took up a new position on the Mongol market, on the southwest of the British legation. August 3rd. Another message was received from the Yamen requesting us to leave the legation and go to Tientsin. The Chinese are extremely anxious to get us out of Peking, as they think that with us out of the way the armies will have no particular reason to come to Peking and will be content to settle up matters at Tientsin. August 4th. A great deal of firing all night. 2 Russians were wounded while building a barricade, one of whom died during the night. August 6th. A sharp fusillade at 1 a.m. Otherwise a quiet day. The firing, which throughout the first few days after the truce amounted only to a few scattering shots, has come to be nearly as hot as before the truce, and attacks are being made again every night. August 8th. The ministers received an official message from the Tsungli Yamen saying, by an imperial edict dated August 7th, full power has been granted to Li Hungchang to discuss and arrange all matters by telegraph with the foreign offices of all the powers. Colonel Shiba reported that a Chinese outside coolie came in to say that all the troops in Peking, with the exception of 5 battalions of Yonglus, have been or are going to be dispatched in great haste to meet the foreign troops. He does not know where the latter are. He adds that another 50,000 foreign troops have been landed at Taku. Li Hung Chang, China's greatest viceroy, August 9th. Sniper firing all day from Tung Fu Xiang's troops, especially at the customs position in the Mongol market. The latter were several times silenced by volleys from the Nordenfeldt machine gun mounted on a parapet built against the west wall of the legation. No firing from Yonglu's troops at all. August 10th. Very heavy rifle fire from all sides about 3 a.m. A messenger sent out to meet the troops returned, bringing a letter from General Gasly, the British general in command, also one from General Fukushima. General Gasly's letter is dated south of Tsaitsin. August 8th. Strong forces of Allies advancing. Twice defeated enemy. Keep up your spirits. The following letter from General Fukushima to Colonel Shiba was received. Camp at Chongchang, 2 kilometers north of Nansatsin. August 8, 1900. Japanese and American troops defeated the enemy on the 5th instant near Paisang and occupied Yangtze on the 6th. The Allied forces, consisting of American, British, Russian, and Japanese, left Yangtze this morning, and while marching north I received your letter at 8 a.m. at a village called Nansatsin. It is very gratifying to learn from you that the foreign community at Peking are holding on, and believe me, it is the earnest and unanimous desire of the Lieutenant General and all of us to arrive at Peking as soon as possible and deliver you from your perilous position. Unless some unforeseen event takes place, the Allied forces will be at Hashuwur on the 9th, Madoyu on the 10th, Changqiaoan on the 11th, Tungchao on the 12th, and Peking on the 13th or 14th. The messenger who brought in the letter told the following story. On August 6th he went by way of Tungchao, finding there that his family had been murdered by the Boxers. On the 7th he met boatloads of wounded and defeated Chinese. At Tsaitsin he met the advance guard of the Allies. The evening of the 8th he marched with the Middle Division to Chuanchang, 6 miles south of Hashuwu. On the morning of Thursday, the 9th, he started with this division, which expected to reach Hashuwu that evening, but left them and returned to Peking by the road to the west. The troops have but few Chinese servants. They have many pack animals, led mostly by Japs. He saw a small number of Russians and a body of several hundred mounted black, probably Bengal lancers, who made fun and charged at him with their spears. He asked how long they would be before reaching Peking, and was told 5 or 6 days, as the Chinese were not stubbornly resisting, the Allies merely having to drive them on ahead of them. The following is an extract from a telegram received by Mr. Conger from the United States Consul at Chefoo. All communications north of this pass through this office. So far as known, excluding Army and Navy, no Americans have been killed, and there has been but little loss of property south of Tientsin. All trouble confined to Peking and Taku. The high officials are doing their best to keep order. Very large force of all nations at Taku. August 12th. Heavy firing all day. August 13th. The whole force of the artillery possessed by us was brought to bear on the Chinese position in the Mongol market, as the Chinese seem to be making a last desperate attempt to kill us all before the arrival of the relief force, and it is expected that from that quarter will come the fiercest attack. Same date, 4 p.m., the Yamen sent word that if we would refrain from firing they would positively stop all volleys on their side. This was agreed to, and 5 hours later, though they had been shooting all day, they made the most terrific attack of the siege. This was kept up all night, the very violent attacks being renewed at intervals of about 2 hours. At 4:30 in the morning, having been up all night under the hottest fire mortals ever endured, I had just dropped asleep, which even the heavy shots did not prevent, when I was awakened by the pop, pop, pop at regular intervals of only the fraction of a second of an automatic gun. As I knew the Chinese had no such gun in their forces, and as our own Colt's gun was just outside the British legation gate to prevent a rush down the moat between the British legation and Lu Wangfu, I instantly came to the conclusion that the final rush which would end the drama and our lives was being made. Grasping my double-barreled shotgun, I rose from the floor, where I had just thrown myself down, and stepped outside in front of the legation chapel. As I did so, I heard the thunder of heavy guns in the direction of the Tungchao gate. Then the situation was clear. The relief were outside the city engaging the Chinese troops, and the automatic gun was not ours, but theirs. I dropped on my knees in the roadway and put up a few words of thanksgiving to Almighty God, and then, rising, called out the good news to those inside the houses, in excited tones. Oh, the sweetness of those sounds! Shall I ever forget how delightful to our ears? How anxious I felt when they ceased for a few moments, and how happy when they were resumed. The Chinese attacking us heard them too, and for a while somewhat slackened their fire to listen. But only for a while, for they kept up a hot fire all day. Poor Mitchell, the brave American gunner, was wounded in the night, having his arm broken by a bullet from the Mongol market attack. But he smiled a grim smile when the guns were heard outside, and remarked, "Oh, you can keep up your devilish racket now, but in a little while longer you will be silent enough." Sikh policemen, the two Oriental types, East Indian and the Chinese, are plainly shown in this picture. The policeman looms up almost like a giant in the midst of his celestial neighbors. At about 4 o'clock, the Americans on the wall saw men in foreign uniforms directly opposite them. While the Americans and Japanese had attacked the Tungchao Stone Road Gate and the Pew Gate, the English had found the Shakuo Gate entirely open and unguarded, and had hastened, as directed by our notes of advice, to the Watergate, directly under the eastern extremity of the American position on the wall. The Sikhs came pouring up to the gate, which they soon smashed in, and then the hurrahs that rent the skies told those in the houses and in the hospital that the siege was over. Just as the relief forces were pouring into the British legation, the first woman to be wounded during the siege, Madame Quillier, a French woman, was struck by a Mauser rifle bullet in the thigh and seriously, but not dangerously, wounded. The following table shows the number of officers and men who were killed or wounded, and those who died of disease during the siege. Chapter 6: Reflections, Incidents, and Memoranda written during siege. Wang, Minister Conger's head servant. One of the most noticeable effects of siege life has been to bring out into prominence all the mean and selfish characteristics of the individual, as well as the heroic and self-sacrificing. People who in times of peace pass for very nice, sociable individuals, with no particularly mean tendencies, when subjected to deprivation in the food supply, and their nerves become a bit shattered with the sound of whistling bullets, the shrieking of flying shells, or the dull thud followed by the crashing and grinding of solid shot, show up in their true bedrock character, and are meanness to the core. It has been most interesting to observe the dissolution of previous friendships, often of years' standing, and the making of new ones between individuals formerly more or less at variance. This has come about sometimes from a man or woman with a sick child, or sick member of his or her family having no supplies of their own, begging a tin of milk or a can of soup or some little delicacy or necessity from a friend having abundance of stores. Upon a flat refusal on the ground that he has none he can spare, the aforetime friend realizes the depth of the former friendship and has no wish to continue it. Again, another instance. A gentleman has gone to inquire of a person in authority in a certain establishment, where he is to move another gentleman, a mutual friend, ill and unable to take care of himself, to a place of safety from quarters no longer tenable, and is told, "If you have been near the sick man, keep away from me. Do what you please with him, only keep away from me and mine, as we are fearful of contagion." "But what do you advise?" persists the inquirer of his quondam friend and superior. "I don't advise anything," is the reply. Is he to be left alone to die or be captured? Where he is? Still persists the anxious friend. "That is none of my business," is the heartless answer, destroying a friendship which had existed for 20 years. Then, too, it has been an interesting study to watch the effects on the optimistic man and the pessimistic man of the various rumors that have drifted in through occasional reports from captives or deserters from the enemy's troops. The optimist believes that our enemies are discouraged, are short of ammunition, are fighting among themselves, are firing high purposely not to injure us, that the relief force is very near, that flashes of heat lightning are searchlights of our friends, etc. The pessimist believes the powers are fighting among themselves to prevent relief until no one power has more troops in the relief than any other. Scouts the idea of searchlights, says that the provisions are nearly exhausted, sees new barricades erected by the enemy every night, recounts the fatal casualties increasing each day, and notes the diminishing strength of the remainder, and, moreover, fully believes and constantly asserts that we are only staving off for a little while an inevitable general massacre. One must admit that to know that 11 of the powers of the world are kept away, or are staying away, from relieving their ministers with their families and nationals for 2 months, at a distance of only 80 miles from navigation by large vessels, is a circumstance rather calculated to increase pessimism. A woman of North China, it is not easy to obtain pictures of the women of the upper classes of China. The beautiful cape with the elaborate embroidery, the little feet mounted upon pedestals, and that sign of high nobility, the long fingernails, shown by nail protectors on the third and fourth fingers of the left hand, are evidences that this woman is of China's 400. Before the siege began, I heard the United States minister say that if the Boxers destroyed a single station on the Peking-Hankow Railroad, known popularly as the Luhan Road, they would have a horde of Cossacks protecting the line within a fortnight. Yet of the 15,000 Russians reported to have been in Port Arthur, when the entire Luhan line and the Peking-Tientsin Railroad was destroyed, not a man has as yet, August 13th, reached Peking. The Boxers are still seen from our loopholes, and make our nights hideous with their horn-blowing and incessant rifle fire. We were also told by those wiseacres, the foreign ministers, that Japan could and would have 50,000 men in Peking if one member of their legation was injured. Their second and third secretaries have been killed. Their legation guard has been almost annihilated, and we see, as yet, no new Japanese faces. Again, Captain Myers assured us the Americans could easily spare 10,000 men from the Philippines, who could reach Peking in, at longest, 2 weeks. But 2 months have now gone by, and they have not materialized. The people who have, on the whole, stood the siege best are the missionaries. They have been more crowded than any others, all the Americans being compelled to occupy the British legation chapel, where they are, indeed, closely packed, while the English missionaries occupy part of the first secretary's house. The Americans have formed into 2 messes, the Presbyterians and Methodists eating at one time, the Congregationalists, who are in the majority, at another. They brought in with them considerable provisions in the way of tin stores, but have been compelled to draw from their commissariat their supply of rice and cracked wheat every day. The foreign ministers guaranteed the 3 shopkeepers of Peking, Messrs. Kruger of Kirolf and Company, Imbeck and Shamit, the amount of their stock if they would turn it into a commissary's hands for distribution to the entire community as needed. This was at once done, and a commissary department appointed to take charge. Many of the besieged owned ponies or mules, which were also placed under a committee, consisting of Messrs. Deering, Allardyce, and Brazier. 1 or 2 of these animals have been killed each day, and each person, foreigner, has been allowed to draw half a pound of meat. Many at first could not be persuaded to even taste horse meat or mule meat, but after several weeks of siege life there were very few who did not daily go to the butchery for their supply. The meat has been inspected every day by a physician, and a certificate of healthy flesh given to the butcher before the meat was allowed to be dispensed. One of the British Marines, William Betts of the Royal Marine Light Infantry, had been a butcher previous to enlistment, and his services have been most valuable to the entire community. The Chinese coolies are fed with soup made from the bones, the head, and cleaned entrails. Not an ounce of the flesh has been wasted. A Peking belle perhaps, after looking at this picture, there will not be so much wonder that occasionally a Caucasian selects a Chinese girl for a wife. That there are very attractive Chinese girls this picture evidences. The clothing, the ornaments, and the surroundings are all typical. Many of the ponies that took part in the Peking Spring meeting as racers, last May, have since served us with juicy steaks or toothsome sausages. The mule meat is considered to be better, on the whole, than horse meat, and in this opinion I fully concur. As we have only 1 donkey in the compound, none of us has as yet tried donkey flesh. But the Chinese assure us it is even better than the larger animals. Several days since one of the 2 cows in the compound, having gone dry, was killed for food, and a notice was placed on the bulletin board at the bell tower that applications for portions of the meat would be received from all women and children, but that only such men as were wounded or ill could, upon a physician's certificate, receive a portion. Everyone wanted some, expecting to highly enjoy a taste of fresh beef and a change from horse. The result was most disappointing. The cow was old and tough, and her flesh infinitely inferior to the regular ration of horse or mule. The Chinese Christians, supported by us in the Su Wang Fu, having been for weeks upon nothing but cracked wheat or Haoliang gruel, were longing for some animal food, and begged they might be given some of the dogs that continued to come from all over the city to feed each night upon the refuse in the moat between the Su Wang Fu and the British legation. A few foreigners with shotguns, therefore, sallied forth yesterday and killed 8 good-sized specimens of the canine race that were forthwith handed over to the hungry converts for their consumption. Dog hunting as a food supply will not be neglected in the future, as after July 18th the shelling ceased, and some of the enemy's soldiers, with an eye to business, brought a few eggs to the Japanese barricade for sale. A market department was established and placed under the care of Messrs. A.D. Brent and J. M. Allardyce, where eggs could be obtained pro rata for numbers of women and children in a household, compared with the supply on hand. These eggs were sold at 4 cents each, but often the supply only admitted of 1 egg being sold to a household of women or children. At other times an egg each could be obtained daily. But alas, the Chinese soldiers soon found out what their soldiers were doing and promptly stopped it, so that after August 6th the market was obliged to close from lack of eggs. On July 20th, 2 days after the shelling ceased, the Tsang Liamen sent a present to the ministers of 100 watermelons, 70 eggplants, 60 vegetable squashes, and 100 cucumbers. Some few of the besieged, besides the diplomats, thus obtained the first taste of fresh vegetables they had enjoyed for a month. The minister's request to the Yamen that vegetable vendors be allowed to come to the barricades or the Great Gate, however, was denied, and we have since had no further supply. It is hard to know that within half a mile of us in any direction there is an abundance of fresh fruits and vegetables, and yet, owing to the closeness of our investment by the hostile troops, we cannot obtain a cent's worth. On August 5th, while I was standing talking with a Japanese sentry, on an outpost barricade of the Su Wang Fu, a Chinese soldier in full uniform walked quickly up the narrow lane our barricade commanded toward us. I called on the Japanese to fire on him, but he remarked, "Let him come on. He has no gun and may want to sell something." True enough, just before reaching us, he held up his hand in front of his face to indicate that he wished to speak, and so was allowed to come around the corner of the barricade. He was a young man of not over 25, but showed the marks of being a confirmed opium eater. "I have brought you some eggs," he remarked, hastily exposing 10 of the precious ovules to view. The Jap counted out 40 cents and gave him, and advised him to clear out, which he speedily did, remarking as he left, "I will lose my head if I am caught at this." As he could buy the eggs in the market for 5 cents, his percentage of profit was very handsome. Chinese gentleman entertaining a friend with an opium pipe after the so-called truce of July 18th. The native soldiers occupying the wall to the east of the American Marines' barricade strictly observed the terms of the truce, and never either enlarged their barricade nor fired another shot. These were the only ones, however, who did so. From all the other barricades we were frequently fired on, and every night or two a vigorous attack would be made upon us, during which the Chinese would expend many hundred rounds of ammunition, firing their rifles into our barricades or the roofs of our houses, and scarcely doing any damage, as we would all seek shelter until the enemy were tired out. Only once or twice did they actually come out from behind their barricades with the intention apparently of rushing us. But upon receiving a volley and having several killed or wounded, they would hastily bolt back again to cover. One night the author was selected by Adjutant Squires to lead a company of 10 coolies in an attempt to remove the stinking carcasses of 2 mules that had been lying festering in the rays of the summer sun for several days, directly under the noses of the American Marines entrenched at foot of the city wall. The stench they emitted was overpowering, but there seemed to be no way to remove them, as to show a head, even at the barricade, was certain to bring a volley from the Chinese on the wall to the east, just beyond the moat. The situation having grown unendurable, it was necessary to risk life even to remove them, and had to be attempted. A corner in the reception room of a wealthy Chinese gentleman in Peking, Mr. Squires formed the plan to have 10 coolies, under a foreigner, go quietly at night through the alleyways and courtyards that had been cut through to communicate with the American legation, to the moat directly under the Chinese on the wall. From thence we were to crawl forward toward the barricade, where our men were warned not to fire upon us, tie a rope around a mule, slip back toward the moat and drag the mule after us and down into the moat, where it could subsequently be covered with kerosene oil and burned. With 10 volunteer coolies, all dressed in dark clothes, and warned not to speak or even whisper, I undertook the task. We reached the position on the Wall Street without incident, and I was congratulating myself we would succeed without the Chinese discovering us, when one of the coolies unfortunately struck his foot against a tin can and sent it rattling across the road. Instantly a volley was fired upon us from the Chinese barricade, only some 50 yards distant, and a perfect hail of bullets struck all about us. "Drop on your faces and lie still," I commanded in a hoarse whisper, which was promptly obeyed. We lay still for about 15 minutes. Then I sent one coolie crawling on toward the nearest mule, only 10 yards away, and he soon had the noose slipped over his head and returned. We dragged the animal quietly enough, until just at the corner of the bridge, where a lot of tins, bottles, and refuse had been dumped in the early days of the siege, and before the Chinese had obtained their present position by driving the Germans from the wall in the rear of their legation. When the animal passed over these obstacles, a loud grating, rattling noise was made, and a second volley poured down from the wall. But this time the corners of the stone bridge protected us and we were in no danger. After another wait of 15 minutes, during which time all became quiet again, we returned and repeated the operation on the second mule, dragging his fragrant carcass alongside the first and completing our work under a third volley equally harmless. Southern wall of Tartar City. This picture gives an idea of the vastness of the ancient defenses of Peking and of the unhygienic character of its surroundings. Across the canal are to be seen the straggling buildings of a Tartar village. Immediately in the foreground lie the stagnant waters of the canal and piles of reeking filth. I received the thanks of Mr. Squires and the entire Marine Guard for this service, as it rendered their position much more bearable thereafter, and their gratitude fully repaid me for the danger incurred. Directly across a moat leading from the Imperial City Wall to the southern wall of the Tartar city of Peking, opposite to the British legation, is a large square compound, known in the local Mandarin tongue as Su Wang Fu, or in plain English as the Palace of Prince Su. This prince inherited the title from his father only 2 years ago. He is a young man of rather pleasant appearance, about 30 years of age. I have dined with him twice at the residence of his next younger brother, who was a patient of mine last winter. This compound is surrounded by a stout brick wall from 12 to 15 feet high. Lying, as the place does, in between the British and Austrian legations, it was decided to take possession of it for the 1,000-odd Christian refugees, mostly Catholics, who had claimed the protection of their teachers, the missionaries, when the cathedrals and mission premises were burned. The idea of doing this originated with Mr. F. H. James, who was killed on the bridge by Kansu soldiers a few days after the occupation. Dr. G. E. Morrison warmly seconded it, and the plan was carried out without opposition from Prince Su or his retainers, as actual warfare had not yet broken out. This palace consists of a lot of rather fine, for Chinese buildings, edifices all of one story, arranged in a series of courts, with a considerable park on the west side facing on the moat dividing the palace from the British legation. As less than 100-yard space is taken up by the width of the moat and the roadway on either side, it will be readily seen that to hold this compound was to protect the entire east side of the British legation from the Chinese fire. Colonel Shiba, the Japanese commandant with his 25 soldiers, was first placed in charge, but later on he was reinforced from time to time by detachments from the Austrians, Italians, British and French Marines, and by the young men of the customs service known as the customs volunteers. The most determined efforts of the siege have been made by the Chinese troops and Boxers to obtain possession of the palace. First, doubtless, because it commanded the entire east wall of the British legation at short range, and secondly, because they desire to exterminate the 1,000-odd refugees, men, women, and children, harbored there. Consequently, the loss of life of our defenders and the number of wounded brought from the Su Wang Fu into the hospital has greatly exceeded that of any other one place. To Colonel Shiba, its heroic defender, is due the greatest credit, inasmuch as he has held the place for weeks, after the other commanders had prophesied it would have to be given up in 24 hours. This he has been enabled to do by building barricade after barricade in the rear of his first line of defense, at often less than 50 yards distance, and when one barricade was shelled until absolutely untenable, retreating to the next strong position in his rear. Colonel Shiba also enlisted all the Japanese civilians in the city, and even trained 25 of the native Catholic converts into very steady soldiers, arming them with rifles taken from the bodies of dead soldiers of the enemy. In addition to the military officers who arrived with the legation guards, There happened to be in Peking at the commencement of the siege 2 English captains, one to study Chinese, the other representing a concession syndicate, Captains Poole and Percy Smith. Both of the gentlemen have rendered efficient and valuable service, and, since the death of Captain Strouts, have been on regular duty. A curious fact, interesting alike to English and Americans, is that on the 4th of July, after Captain Myers had been wounded in the sortie on the city wall the previous night, Captain Percy Smith commanded the American Marines in the trench on the wall all day, under hot fire from cannon and rifles, and the Marines speak in the highest terms of his bravery and coolness, and his care for their comfort and safety. Mr. E. von Strauch, formerly first lieutenant in the German army, but now a member of the Customs Service, has also rendered valuable service in relieving the officer in charge at all the various posts, such as the city wall, held by the Americans, the Suwang Fu, held by Colonel Shiba, the Hanlin Yuan, held by the British, and other points outside the legation. The men also expressed the highest regard for him. So much for the outside officers. Among civilians deserving credit are many who have daily and faithfully done the work apportioned to them in capacities where they have been unnoticed, but where their work has contributed much to the general comfort, and some of them at least should be mentioned. Messrs. Allardyce and Brazier in the Meat Supply Department, Mr. S. M. Russell in the Commissary Department, Mr. Stell in the Coolie Supply Department, Dr. Chauncey Goodrich and Messrs. Walker and Whiting in the Coolies Food Supply, together with Messrs. Tewksbury, Hobart and Norris, all have steadily worked for the common good, often both day and night. It has been noticed by a great many Englishmen and others that the Russians besieged with us have been of uniformly gentlemanly and courteous bearing. They have won golden opinions from all, with the exception, perhaps, of one intensely biased newspaper correspondent, who reads in the most commonplace saying some deeply concealed meaning, and some unkind intention toward the British interests. A Russian gentleman is a perfect gentleman, and uniformly a marvelous linguist. I have several times been present in a room with a Frenchman, a German, and an Italian, with whom several Russians carried on animated conversations, addressing each man in his own language, and apparently with equal fluency. From M. de Geers down through his whole legation, the professors of Russian in the Imperial University and Tung Wen Quan, the officers and clerks of the Russo-Chinese Bank, one can find none who are not perfect gentlemen and most agreeable companions. Baron von Radu, the captain in charge of the Russian Marines, has been a most devoted officer, and every point of his defenses has had his constant personal supervision. He has never undressed to sleep in the last 2 months, but has taken the broken rest he has obtained lying in a steamer chair in one of his barricades. He has lost greatly in flesh, and is but a skeleton of his former self, but remains the same courteous officer and gentleman under circumstances that have altered the dispositions of not a few. Houseboats used for interior travel on Chinese rivers. Families pass their entire existence on these boats. Some are fitted very comfortably. If the diplomatic corps in Peking could only have heard the many and varied contemptuous remarks made about them by their own nationals, both before and during the siege, they would perhaps have a new idea of what their titles of envoys extraordinary meant. As I heard one gentleman remark, "After this lot are disposed of, I hope they will send us a set of envoys ordinary, common-sense kind of men who have eyes and ears." It is certainly marvelous that with the information so readily obtainable as to the Boxer movement, its aims and intentions, and after having it forced almost upon them, as the British, American, and French ministers certainly have had by their missionaries and others, the diplomatic corps should have blindly allowed themselves to be penned up in Peking with only a handful of guards, to endure treatment as disgraceful as it has been unpleasant. True, M. Pichon urged his colleagues early to send for legation guards, and wanted them in larger numbers, but even he, after constant assurances from Bishop Feiner, who was perfectly informed as to the gravity of the movement and the imperial sanction, declined to act independently and allowed the situation to proceed to the utmost extremity before he believed the priests true and that Sun Liamen false. A very blue lot they have been during the siege. Although better fed than the unfortunates, the results of their credulity, compelled to suffer with them, they have not been pleasant company, and have been allowed to flock together as birds of a feather, and discuss at length the utter neglect of their home governments in not speedily rescuing them. The rest of us poor mortals have long since come to the conclusion that our governments have found out their true value, and have decided they are not worth a rescue. The Belgian minister, having arrived only a few weeks before the siege began, is not to blame for the position, and he wonders as much as the ordinary mortal how his colleagues could have allowed it to come to pass. Is it possible that England and America, if they had been informed of the true state of affairs by their representatives, would not have requested their ministers to notify all the foreign women and children to leave the country? When a foreign war is inevitable, even in a civilized country, it is a necessity for non-combatants to leave. In a barbarous country, it means murder, often with torture, to remain. Yet our missionaries in Peking and places inland were not warned that their district troubles were not local, but general, and that they should hasten to the coast to be nearer protection.